Oh, hi, my name's Nels Tim, and my degree's in mechanical engineering. You know, the reason I made this video is because of the Senator Santorum Amendment, which was attached to the No Child Left Behind Act. His amendment challenges biological evolution, which most of us understand as Darwinism. The majority of people that I've spoken with believe in Darwinism, but they can't seem to define it. All they know is that it must be true. Why? Because it's taught in our schools. As you can see, I have found that our education system is biased towards Darwinism. So, when I read the Santorum Amendment, I found that the senator agrees with me about having a full range of scientific views so our children will have a quality education. Before we go any further, let's hear what the senator has to say in his amendment, okay?
The conferees recognize that a quality science education should prepare students to distinguish the data and testable theories of science from religious or philosophical claims that are made in the name of science. Where topics are taught that may generate controversy, such as biological evolution, the curriculum should help students to understand the full range of scientific views that exist, why such topics may generate controversy, and how scientific discoveries can profoundly affect society.
I've read that even the ACLU likes it. I wonder if that's because the amendment challenges religion. One thing I'm sure about is that Darwin challenges us to answer questions about who we are and where do we come from. This can only be understood when we look at alternatives to Darwinism. Some people may not like what I have to say, but I just want to present the facts. Then you decide what you want to believe. Is that fair? Remember the questions we just saw? Well, they have always interested me, but I felt very intimidated by them. Why? Because my field is in engineering and not in evolution. But engineers will often turn to nature at various times to help solve design problems. Why? Because nature often offers the best solution for certain design problems. For example, some Swiss engineers have turned to the vulture to design a more efficient aircraft wing. They designed the wingtips to mimic the special spreading of the wingtip feathers of the vulture, and then the results were described as startling, allowing them to halve the spread of the wing for the same lift-to-drag ratio. This might not sound exciting to you, but this design has just reduced the amount of fuel the plane will use. This will help our environment and also in traveling costs. I read an article in 2005 by Janine Benyus. She's the co-founder of the Biomimicry Guild. She stated, if you have a design problem, nature probably solved it already. After all, it has taken 3.8 billion years to come up with the solution. You know what? This doesn't make any sense to me. You're trying to tell me that the vulture somehow, over billions of years, continued to modify their wing until it was perfect? How did he know, or the vulture really know, when it was perfect? Hasn't she ever heard of DNA? Doesn't she know that the instructions in the DNA establishes how a vulture will be constructed? She must be a Darwinist. They believe that with enough time, mutations, and natural selection, all the animals on Earth evolved until they produced this perfect design. This is called soft or inferred science, not hard science that uses physics, chemistry, and math to prove its case. An example of inferred science is the teaching of how dinosaurs evolved into birds. You know, Darwinists believe that because there are similarities between the two, and because Darwin's tree of life said they're related, therefore it must be true. This is Darwinism, and this is what our public education system teaches. We will take a closer look at this issue a little later on, but as a mechanical engineer, I don't have the luxury of using inferences to come up with the answers. You know, as we go through this presentation, I'd like you to take the Santorum challenge along with me. You can do this by placing your answers on the scorecard enclosed in the DVD packet. But first, let me explain how it works. I'll read the question, then I will choose my answer. I will choose either A, B, C, D, E, or F, which is at the bottom of the page. Then I will choose the proper box. If you disagree with me, then make your own choice and place it in the proper box. Let's start with some of the questions we saw at the opening. Okay? Now, don't get nervous. This is not a test. You don't have to agree with me. Darwinists probably won't. All I ask is that you at least listen to what I have to say. First, I will present Darwin's theory over here, okay? Then I will present information from evolutionary experts which challenge Darwin's theory. I will then analyze this information and explain how a mechanical engineer would probably interpret it. Then you choose what makes the most sense to you by marking the scorecard for either Darwin's theory or other laws and theories. I have found that in order to better understand an issue, it is best to define a term. A good example would be biology. It is defined as science that deals with living organisms. And this is a very good place to start. In order to have a living organism, we first must determine how life arose, right? Let's see what evolutionist Alfred Fisher has to say about Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, and how life came about.
Origin of Species, not addressed in 1859, and is still a mystery in 1998. Both the origin of life and the origin of the major groups of animals remains unknown. Grolier Multimedia Encyclopedia, 1998, Fossil section.
It's not addressed? So what is being taught in our schools? Darwinists believe that life came from some primeval soup. Most believe that it was because of either some kind of bacteria or blue-green algae. It's known as pond scum. So how long did it take for life to arise? Holt's biology book states it takes a very long time. That's the answer? I find general statements like this extremely disturbing to me. Why? Because they can't prove it and want you to accept it as fact. Have any Darwinists tried to solve this problem by experimentation? Well, surprisingly, yes. The two scientists are Miller and Urey. They tried to explain this in 1953. Their experiment has been disproved. So, my question is, why is it still in our biology textbooks? Now, let's see what other scientists have to say about how life arose. Here, paraphrasing Robert Hazen, who works for NASA's Astrobiology Institute, he said, For a long time, it was believed that life arose in the primeval soup. But that idea has largely been abandoned, and most evolutionists now believe life originated in the rocks and minerals of the early Earth. You know, this shows that no Darwinist is sure how life arose. So, our first question is, can Darwinism show how life came about by the laws of science? My answer is, it can't scientifically. And yes, to other theories and laws. I chose E, 1, and 2. Now, just look what those are on your scorecard. You see, you can disagree with me. It's okay, there's no problem. You see, this is not a test. But before we go any further, we need to know just exactly what is Darwinism. Let me show you this. Darwinists will tell you that they only believe in matter, okay? And you got to say, why? You see, because they can test it. So, the next question is, what's matter? See, it's everything that you can see, like this book, what you can touch, that's matter.
All matter is made up of atoms, and atoms are made up of particles called electrons, protons, and neutrons. All the known atoms can be found in the periodic table. The question is, where did the particles come from, and how did the atom form? Darwinists don't know, but they say that the hydrogen atom formed first and the rest evolved into more complex atoms. Darwinists say the same thing about living cells. Somehow, by random chance, the single cell formed and then the rest evolved. This is soft or inferred science. Hard science sees the atom and sees design. Hard science asks itself how we can make use of the atom through the laws of chemistry and physics. The atom shows design. So is there a designer, or did the atom happen by chance? You choose.
Let's see if you recognize some atoms. How about hydrogen and oxygen? And what happens if they're bonded? What do you get? Water. Here's silicon, and we make silicon chips for our computers. And there's gold, silver, uranium, and all the rest. You know, I read that God made man from the dust of the earth. I wonder if that's true. Let's see what science has to say about this. Here is the atomic structure of man and dust. As you can see, both columns are the same. We have hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, and it goes all the way down to magnesium. But you know, also later on, I will show you how dust became life. So, let's turn to question 2, okay? How does Darwinism account for atoms? I say they can't to Darwinism. And guess what? Yes to other theories and laws. What I've chosen is E2 and F. Now, let's turn to Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, by Natural Selection, and see what he believed about how all the species came to be, okay? He believed that natural selection, well, basically also known as the survival of the fittest. And what is the survival of the fittest? That is killing the weak and the unfit. This is how man came to be.
Charles Darwin, in his book The Origin of Species, stated, "Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely, the production of higher animals, directly follows."
The problem now is, it has now become a moral issue. So we need to ask ourselves, is killing right or is it wrong according to Darwin? Okay. Now, question 3. How can Darwinism account for morality? I say it can't scientifically to Darwinism. And yes to other theories and laws. I choose F. Let's see what Barbara Reynolds has to say about its impact on our children. Now, she's a columnist for the Gannett News Service.
Your Kids Go Ape in School, Here's Why, by Barbara Reynolds. Don't be surprised if our little darlings go ape or get up to monkey shines when they return to class. Misbehavior tops the list of what parents and teachers worry about. And that's exactly where such concerns belong, considering what kids are not being taught in school. In most schools, Johnetta and Johnny are being taught evolution, that humankind evolved from apes. The issue came to the forefront recently because a school district near San Diego had the good sense to adopt a policy of teaching creationism, much to the dismay of critics, including USA Today's editorial page. It is amazing that media institutions that virtually worship the First Amendment are the first to toss it when it comes to religious free speech. When both creationism and evolution are taught side by side, you don't have the establishment of a religion, which the Constitution prohibits, but an opportunity to be protected from one-sided, narrow thinking, which the Constitution encourages. Prohibiting the teaching of creationism in favor of evolution creates an atheistic, belligerent tone that might explain why our kids sometimes perform like Godzilla instead of children made in the image of God. While evolution teaches that we are accidents or freaks of nature, creationism shows humankind as the offspring of a divine creator. There are rules to follow which govern not only our times on earth, but also our afterlife. One philosophy preaches happenstance with mayhem as a conclusion. The other, divine order. One suggests the survival of the fittest, the other, a commitment to serve the weakest and sickest among us. To me, there is no contest. Teaching evolution makes about as much sense as teaching our kids that humankind was grown in a cabbage patch or raised by wolves. Even in the dullest mind, a light bulb should go off. Who created the cabbage? And who made the wolves? Under the rules of evolution, teachers are forced to answer to King Kong rather than to the King of Kings. We are not human animals. We have written speech and higher intellect. But more important, we have souls fueled by a spirit of right and wrong. Human action is determined by core beliefs. Creationism teaches that humans are wonderfully made with the promise of high expectations. If evolution is forced on our kids, we shouldn't be perplexed when they beat on their chests, or worse yet, beat on each other and their teachers.
Does she make any sense? Next, Darwin believed that everything started from a simple single cell, okay? Darwinists always seem to overlook the information in the DNA, which holds all the information necessary to build every living plant and animal on this earth. DNA has been called the most complex molecule in the universe, and scientists still don't know all its secrets. When you look at a cell, you need to think of all its components. And all its components are like little machines and have a specific job to do. If I were to remove just one machine, the cell wouldn't function. So, the first question would be, how did the cell know what machines were necessary for it to work? And also, what job it had to do? Next, how did the membrane form around these components? Next, how did the cell figure out that it should reproduce itself by splitting into two, thus allowing living beings to grow? Next, cells have different jobs to do. They have different shapes. Check out the muscle cell, the nerve cell, the red blood cell, and the bone cell. Now, here's the big question that we all need to answer. Every one of us has grown from such a single cell to 100 trillion cells in a human. The DNA in the chromosome has been programmed by whom? Intelligence or chance? You choose. Let's see what Dr. Warner Gitt, an information specialist, has to say about DNA.
Dr. Werner Gitt, an information specialist, states, the question, how did life originate, which interests all of us, is inseparably linked to the question, where did the information come from? Since the findings of James D. Watson, and Francis H.C. Crick, it was increasingly realized by contemporary researchers that the information residing in the cells is of crucial importance for the existence of life. Anybody who wants to make meaningful statements about the origin of life would be forced to explain how the information originated. All evolutionary views are fundamentally unable to answer this crucial question.
You know, again, Darwinists can't answer this question. Dr. Francis Collins, the director of the Human Genome Project, and this is a project that analyzes information that's in a normal cell, or most people refer to it as a gene. So when they have a mutated gene, they try to find out what's wrong with it and then try to correct it. You see sometimes here, as my hand's shaking, I have Parkinson's. And what they're trying to do is now work on this, putting a virus in my head to help straighten this mutated gene out. He's also the author of a book called The Language of God. And it says, a scientist presents evidence for belief, which is really DNA. Now, we're not here to talk about is God real, or if God's not real, or what religion you're going to. But he was it was kind of interesting to me about this Dr. Collins, because once he was an ardent atheist and Darwinist, but this project converted him over to a believer in God. So what I would suggest is that you get his book and read it. Now, what we're going to do is go to question 4. How can Darwinism account for the information in DNA? I say it can scientifically to Darwinism, and yes, to other theories and laws. I chose F. You know, remember earlier I spoke about the law of biogenesis, which states that life can only come from life. Here, what I'm going to do is show you that experiment that was used to prove biogenesis. Let's bring up slide 7, please. One of the experiments that scientists used to prove how life came about was called spontaneous generation. They placed a piece of meat in an open jar, which allowed flies to lay their eggs, which then turned into maggots. The scientists believed that life arose spontaneously from nothing. They didn't know that flies were responsible for the maggots. Thus, this theory has been disproved. Later, Louis Pasteur, who lived from 1822 to 1895, he proved the law of biogenesis, which states that life can only come from life. In Pasteur's experiment, he sterilized the matter, which was sealed in a jar, from all other living organism. Thus, no life arose, proving that only life can come from life. So, the question is, how did life arise? Let's see what Nobel Prize winner George Wall has to say about the origin of life.
Nobel Prize winner George Wall stated in the Scientific American, "There are only 2 possible explanations as how life arose. Spontaneous generation arising to evolution, or a supernatural creative act of God. There is no other possibility." Spontaneous generation was scientifically disproved 120 years ago by Louis Pasteur and others. But that just leaves us with only one other possibility, that life came as a supernatural act of creation by God. But I can't accept that philosophy because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible: spontaneous generation leading to evolution.
All I can say about Dr. Wall is he's at least honest, and being a Darwinist, he is allowed to use the term God as the only explanation. Yet, if you were a believer in God, you would get criticized for your belief. You know, this makes no sense to me. But I will refer to Dr. Wall's statement as the God option on the scorecard. So let's turn to question 5. How can Darwinism explain the origin of life? I say it can't scientifically. to Darwinism and yes to other theories and laws. I chose A, E, 1, 2, and F. Now, let's see what Darwin had to say about other theories.
Charles Darwin stated, and I quote, "A fair result can be obtained only by fully stating and balancing the facts and arguments on both sides of each question."
You know, I agree with him. Surprise? Let's see what Darwin had to say about his theory for it to be true, okay?
Charles Darwin, in his book The Origin of Species, stated, "If my theory be true, numberless intermediate varieties must assuredly have existed."
Has anybody found any intermediate species? To answer this, we need to turn to the fossil record. But first, let's see what a fossil looks like. First, we see a school of fish that have been fossilized. In order for fossilization to occur, plants and animals need to be covered quickly by sediment. Otherwise, they will decay. Next, we see a fish having dinner. Now that's what I call fast coverage. Next, we see a dinosaur fossilized. And lastly, we see one fossil bed. There are fossil beds all around the world. Now, here's the question. How did all the plants and animals get covered? Here are two theories. The first is the Earth was hit by a meteor and the dust from it covered everything. The problem with dust is it wouldn't cover them quick enough for fossilization. The second is a worldwide flood. This makes more sense to me. Why? Because a flood would bury plants and animals quickly, causing fossilization. One question is there enough water to cover the Earth? The answer is yes. If the Earth were smooth like a cue ball, the amount of water would be measured approximately 1.5 to 2 miles high above the Earth. Now, it's up to you to choose a theory, a meteor or a flood. You choose. Let's see what Dr. Stephen Jay Gould, a Harvard professor, had to say about all the intermediate fossils, okay, that Darwin needs in order for it to be true.
Dr. Stephen Jay Gould, professor at Harvard University, when addressing Darwin's missing links, Dr. Gould stated, "There are no missing links. The whole chain is missing. The absence of fossil evidence for intermediary stages has been a persistent and nagging problem for evolution."
There aren't any? Realizing this, Dr. Gould came up with his own theory called punctuated equilibrium.
Dr. Stephen Jay Gould, a paleontologist, in his theory known as punctuated equilibrium, states, "The sudden appearance of body plans in the Cambrian period 600 million years ago, by and large, served as the blueprints for those seen today. Few major body plans have appeared since that time."
All the body plans are the same? Let's go and take a look at question 6. How can Darwinism explain punctuated equilibrium? It can, scientifically. So what do Darwinists say about punctuated equilibrium? Oh, it's just faster, a faster process than Darwinian evolution. Tell that to Gould and he goes ballistic. They are opposites. So my answer is yes for other theories and laws. And I've chosen A, C, E3, and F. What does Dr. Levington's article in the Scientific American have to say about Darwin's intermediate fossils?
Jeffrey Levington is a professor and chair of the Department of Ecology and Evolution at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. He received a bachelor's degree from the City College of New York and a PhD from Yale University, both in geology. He is a marine ecologist and evolutionary biologist, a Guggenheim Fellow, and the author of books Marine Ecology and Genetics, Paleontology, and Macroevolution.
Now that's some credentials.
Professor Levington stated in the article in Scientific America in November 1992, the body plans that evolved in the Cambrian period by and large served as the blueprints for those seen today. Few new major body plans have appeared since that time. Just as all automobiles are fundamentally modeled after the first four-wheel vehicles, all the evolutionary changes since the Cambrian period have been mere variations on those basic themes. Why haven't new animal body plans continued to crawl out of the evolutionary cauldron during the past hundreds of millions of years? Why are the ancient body plans so stable?
That's a good question for Darwinists.
Evolutionary biologists are still trying to determine why no new body plans have appeared during the past 500 million years. In short, there is no reason to think that the rate of evolution was ever slower or faster than it is now. Yet the conclusion still leaves unanswered the paradox posed by the Cambrian explosion and the mysterious persistence of those ancient body plans. Evolution at the species level continues unabated, but variation in the surviving body plans does not seem to occur. For whatever unknown reasons, there will probably never again be an explosion of animal diversity on Earth like the one that took place sometime around the early Cambrian.
The fact that all species appeared at once seems to present another problem for Darwinists. You see, Darwinism lacks proof according to Gould and Levington. So what did Darwin do to try to support his theory? He turned to the geological column. Why? Because it shows that if evolution did occur, all the species must have evolved this way. So before we hear from Darwin, let me show you what the geologic column looks like. Here's the geologic column. It was established in the early 1800s, and each layer of rock was given a name, like Jurassic. Then there was the age and the index. It's considered to be the Darwinist Bible. It shows the order in which species should appear, the time of their appearance, and the name of their period or era. The single cell should first appear around 600 million years. Next we'll find multicellular invertebrates like jellyfish and trilobites that have no skeletal structure and appears in the Cambrian period. Next we'll find the vertebrates that have a skeletal structure like a fish. Then comes amphibians like frogs. Next are reptiles like dinosaurs, which appear in the Jurassic period. And lastly are mammals, such as horses, dogs, apes, and man. Birds also fall into this period. The problem with the geologic column is it doesn't exist anywhere on this earth in this order. All species appear to be all intertwined with each other. So, what did Darwin say about the geological findings?
Charles Darwin states, "Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic change, and this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be argued against the theory. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record."
This is great. The record must be imperfect? What? I can't believe this guy. Everything is wrong, including the evidence. I can see why Darwinists don't want other theories to be taught. Question 7. How can Darwinists explain the problem with a geological record? I say they can't to Darwinism, and yes to other theories and laws. I've chosen A, C, and F. Next, let's see what Darwin's Tree of Life shows about reptiles, such as dinosaurs to birds. Well, here's Darwin's family tree of reptiles. When you look at the base, you'll see it says early reptiles. Follow the little green line up. You come into a dinosaur, and right after that dinosaur, you'll see a bird. Now, do you truly believe that a dinosaur turns into a bird? You know, this is important because when I spoke to the State Board of Education, I noticed that in their core curriculum, now, this is what educators have to teach. They have to teach how reptiles evolved into birds. The state education specialist I spoke with was going to go to all the school districts and explain to the other teachers how these reptiles or dinosaurs turned into birds. Again, this is called inferred science or soft science, which, I really can't accept it because it only assumes by inferring that this might have happened. I explained to her that the National Geographic magazine did an article on this, and they found out that it was a hoax. So what I'm going to do is show you the magazine and the article. Now, this is the magazine. It's the National Geographic. Dinosaurs Takes Wings. Here's the article. And if you can see this, folks, it shows you, it starts out as a dinosaur, correct? Then it keeps starting to run. And then here's the little arms. And they start to flap their little arms. And as they continue to flap their little arms, for some unknown reason, feathers, these scales from the dinosaur, turn into feathers. And the feathers shape around the arms somehow. And then somehow, boy, these are a lot of somehows, aren't they? Somehow, all of a sudden, wow, we have a bird. And the bird just then continues to take off and fly. And guess what? Thus, we have the first bird. Now, do you really think this could have happened? I believe that the instructions in the DNA built the bird. By the way, they also built the dinosaur. What do you think? I also sent the State Board of Education and the science specialist an article from Dr. Lynn Margolis on how she states this is genetically impossible to happen. I never heard back from the State Board of Education. Well, I'll tell you what, let's hear from another person, a famous person, and his name is W.E. Swinton.
W.E. Swinton, of the British Museum of Natural History in London, states there are several problems with reptile to bird evolution. Number 1, lungs are totally different. 2, modern birds are found in layers with and lower than dinosaurs. Number 3, scales and feathers attach the body differently and develop from different genes on the chromosomes. 4, birds have a 4-chambered heart. Reptiles have 3. The evolutionary origin of the bird is largely a matter of deduction. There is no fossil evidence of the stages through which the remarkable change from reptile to bird was achieved.
Why aren't these facts being taught? Let's go to question 8. Can Darwinism show scientifically how reptiles turned into birds? I say it can't to Darwinism, and yes, to other theories and laws. I have chosen A, C, D, E3, and F. Back in 1859, Darwin believed that natural selection was responsible for all the millions of species on Earth. The scientific community, by the way, at that time knew that natural selection could not produce a new species. But it wasn't really sure what mechanism was responsible for it. So, only until the 1950s did the scientific community actually come forth and claim that it now takes, by the way, mutations, natural selection, to produce all these new species. And guess what? Over a long period of time. This new theory is called Neo-Darwinism. Neo obviously means new. So let's go to question 9. Can natural selection produce all species? I say it can't, scientifically, to Darwinism, and yes to other theories and laws. I have chosen A, E3, and F. Let's look at a mutation to see if this is the answer to the entire species problem. We can turn to our school biology textbooks and see that the fly in the middle is the normal fly. The other flies have mutated genes. You'll see flies with stubby wings, wingless, curly wings, which make them unable to survive outside the laboratory. The flies continue to be flies, and there will always be flies. They will never turn into a different species. Yet Darwinists believe that the mutations are responsible for a new species. Let's see what Dr. Lynn Margolis said in 2006. And who is she? She is the past president of the Honor Society for Scientists.
Today, many evolutionists assume that a large number of small mutations can account for macroevolution. This conclusion is not based on experimental evidence, but on the assumption that the evidence for microevolution can be extrapolated to macroevolution. The empirical evidence, however, is clear. Neither macromutations nor micromutations can prove a significant source of genetic information. Mutation accumulation does not lead to new species or even to organs or tissues. Margulis and Sagan, 2002. What it eventually leads to is sickness and death. Margulis, when president of the Honor Society for Scientists, added that many biologists claim they know for sure that random mutation, purposeless chance, is the source of inherited variation that generates new species of life. No, I say. Margulis, 2006.
This appears to present another problem for Darwinists. What does our biology school books have to say? Microevolution leads to macroevolution. Now, hold on for a minute. Dr. Margolis disagrees. We just read what she said. Who is right? An 1859 Darwinian theory or 2006 research? So, let's turn to question 10. Can mutations and natural selection produce all species? I say they can scientifically, to Darwinism. And yes, to other theories and laws. I've chose A, C, D, E3, and F. Now, do you believe that this information should be shared with the students? What do mutations really do to a species? Now, according to Dr. Margolis and, remember, Dr. Collins of the Human Genome Project, they both agree that mutations eventually lead to disease and death, and not another species. So, let's turn to question number 11. Can Darwinists explain how mutations cause disease and death and not another species? I say they can't scientifically, to Darwinism, and yes, to other theories and laws. I've chosen A, D, E3, and F. Next, we need to know why there is so much controversy and confusion over evolution. Remember in the beginning what I said we have to do whenever we have controversy? First, we need to define terms so we are all on the same page. This helps us understand just exactly what we're talking about and hopefully will end this confusion. I believe that when we understand the following terms, micro and macroevolution, we will now understand the controversy. And here's the problem. The newer biology textbooks blur these terms, and this causes more confusion. Now, the older ones spell it out quite clearly, as you will see. So, when I was at the State Board of Education, I asked about these terms, micro and macroevolution. I was told that evolution is evolution. There is no micro or macro. Here is an older version of their biology textbooks. As you can see in the old biology textbooks, it says very clearly evidence of macroevolution, and below that it says evidence of microevolution. Let's define microevolution. It is defined as small changes within a species. Now remember, it's within a species. The species doesn't change. That's very important. Micro means small. Let me tell you this. Let me give you an example. There are about 250 varieties of dogs. Now, dogs can only breed with other dogs. They can't breed with other animals. That's why, very simply, dogs are dogs, cats are cats. Don't forget this, there's also adaptation that occurs in all animals and humans. This means there is enough information in the DNA for a species to adjust to environmental conditions. This is also considered microevolution. Let me give you one example, okay? That one example would be Darwin's finches. You see, their beaks varied because of the changing conditions. But the finch was always a finch, and the finch will always be a finch, which is a bird. Now, the common ancestor to the bird, guess what? It's not a dinosaur. Let me give you one other example, because they use this all the time in their arguments. They say that, well, Darwinists say that, well, we can understand, all you have to do is look at bacteria, and when you see bacteria, that's evolution. And again, Darwinists love to use this as proof for evolution. They say, see how this bacteria is constantly changing by mutating? But remember, this is microevolution and not Darwin's macroevolution. So guess what? The bacterial will always be bacteria and will never turn into something else. Macroevolution. This is Darwinism. This is defined as a major change to another species. You know, remember the word, a big macro being a big change. The big change is you go from one species, like a dinosaur, and you turn into a bird. Now, the problem is that Darwinists refuse to accept the fact that microevolution doesn't lead to macroevolution. Why? Because it destroys Darwin's theory. Now, let's turn to question 12. Dr. Margolis stated that microevolution does not lead to macroevolution. How does Darwinism explain that? I say they can't scientifically to Darwinism, and yes, to other theories and laws. I chose A, D, E3, and F. Let's see if Darwin's macroevolution makes any sense.
The problem with macroevolution is you must believe, among other things, that fish changed into amphibians and reptiles changed into birds. If evolution happened, then over a period of time, fins had to change into legs, and legs had to change into wings. But logic tells us, before a fin becomes a good leg, it will be unfit either to swim or walk. Likewise, before a leg becomes a good wing, it will be unfit either to walk or fly. But natural selection is supposed to cancel out unfit structures. If so, then macroevolution by natural selection is an oxymoron. It's self-contradicting. So it's improbable that any species changed its anatomical structure and evolved into a higher life form.
You know, Darwin's macroevolution doesn't make any sense, and it's not based on any laws of science that I know of. Now, let's take a look at question 13, okay? Darwin's macroevolution based on any law of science? I say no to Darwinism, and yes to other theories and laws. I have chosen A, C, D, E3, F. What do you think? Let's see what's being taught in our schools about our ancestors, okay? Now, we're going to turn to human evolution, and let's bring up slide 24. Well, folks, from our textbooks, we can see that one of our earliest ancestor is this thing that looks like a rat, and some of them call it a tree shrew. And this is in the mammal family. Next, what happens, we'll go to above here, it's the gibbon. Then we go to an orangutan and a gorilla, then a pygmy chimpanzee. Then we'll come over here to an early hominid, which is something like a half human, half ape. Then all of a sudden we wind up with the human family. Let's see the evidence presented also in Time magazine. Well, Time has to say is, it starts out on the top, it says, all in the family, an up-to-date genealogy of modern humans and their evolutionary predecessors. And over here, starting out on the left side again, it says, the more scientists dig, the more hominid species they find. What's a hominid? A hominid is something that's partial ape and partial human. And then they show you from 1 to 15 various skulls of what we assume is evidence to prove that this is our family. And then we drop down to the bottom, and as you can see on the bottom, we will start out from the left side, which says how we got from there to here. Common ancestors, no fossils found yet, but scientists believe the human and ape lines diverged between 6 million and 4 million years ago. They state that there are no fossils. What? Well, here we are again trying to figure out where we came from and who we are. No matter if you start on the top or the bottom, we'll see a number of question marks. So let's start at the bottom, and you'll see right here it says primates. Obviously, we don't even know where the primates came from, so we have a big question mark there. Now, let's do this. Start at the top, and we'll work our way backwards down towards the primates. Here's the human skull. As you come down, whoops, hey, again, another question mark. Where did we come from there? All we know so far is that there is no link between ape and mankind, and all we have is question marks. What does the latest fossil study in the year 2007 say about human evolution?
August 2007, Associated Press reports, fossil study only muddles human evolution theory. The discovery by Mev Leakey, a member of a famous family of paleontologists, shows that 2 species of early human ancestors lived at the same time in Kenya. That pokes holes in the chief theory of man's early evolution, that one of those species evolved from the other. The old theory is that the first and oldest in our family tree, Homo habilis, evolved into Homo erectus, which then became human, Homo sapiens. But Leakey's find suggests those 2 earlier species lived side by side about 1.5 million years ago.
The oldest and the youngest man lived side by side? Hey, guess what? This can't happen. According to who? According to Darwinism. Now, here's one of the most famous persons that is always looking for the missing link over in Africa. Now, her name's Mary Leakey, and she's one of the world's leading, watch this is a tongue twister, paleoanthropologists, okay? What does she have to say about Darwinism?
All those trees of life with their branches of our ancestors? That's a lot of nonsense. Nonsense taught as fact.
Is she claiming that Darwinism is nonsense? So, let's go to question 14. Can Darwinism prove scientifically that man came from the ape or any other animal? I say it can't, scientifically to Darwinism, and yes to other theories and laws. I chose A, C, D, E3, and F. You know, there's many people out there that make fun of the Adam and Eve story. You know, it's just a story. All fiction, right? But what I found interesting was I'm going to look at Adam and Eve through the eyes of science and see what it has to say. Now, it was determined that by testing the this is another tongue twister, mitochondrion in the human cell, it showed that all humans came from, guess what? one female. Now, when they tried and tested the Y chromosome for the male, it showed that all humans came from one male. But you know what I even found more interesting about Darwinism is that when the first human appeared, you know, you always see that on these little charts, right? Who appeared first? Think about it. Was it a male or was it a female? You see, in order for the human race to even exist, you're going to have a male and a female. You just can't start with one. So here's the question. Here's the problem. What we have to do is calculate the probability of what it would take for a male and a female to appear in the same place at the same time, you know, so they can have, guess what, little babies, and then we can have the human race. Well, let's take a look at the probability of this actually happening. Okay? Let's turn to slide 28, please.
Human evolution. Humans come in two models, he and she, and that's a fact. Scientists won't often admit it, but they don't have the foggiest notion how the two complementary bio-designs we call boy and girl could have evolved. Like the chicken or the egg, which came first, male or female? If they evolved in unison, then how did countless blind mutations in one sex match up perfectly with countless blind mutations in the opposite sex? Statistically, the chances of that happening are 0 times 0. What's more, each sexual biodesign is so sophisticated that it can't function if it's not fully developed. But natural selection cancels out mutations that aren't functional. So it's scientifically impossible for either sex to evolve by natural selection, let alone both together. Obviously, two sexes had to be completely developed and functional at the start, or we would have become extinct before we began. Think about that.
Does this make any sense? So the Adam and Eve story appears to make sense. And guess what? Darwinism seems to have another problem. Now, question 15. The probability of a male and female evolving at the same time is 0. How does Darwinism explain this? I say it can't scientifically. And yes, to other theories and laws, which again, I will choose A, C, D, E2, and F. Now, I don't know if anybody's heard of Dr. Francis Crick. He's a very important person. He was the discoverer of DNA. You know, how it twists together and how you can take it apart. Now, this brilliant man who understood this about the information in this DNA, what does he have to say about DNA?
Dr. Francis Crick, discoverer of DNA, in his theory known as directed panspermia, stated life could not have evolved on Earth by chance. Why? Because of the complexity of DNA. He believes that only a higher intelligence from outer space could be responsible for life.
Darwin in 1859 had absolutely no knowledge of DNA. It was only discovered in the mid-1950s. Yet Darwinists referred to the single cell as simple. They always seem to overlook the complexity of DNA. One of the reasons Dr. Crick might have come to his conclusion is that the probability of just one DNA arranging itself by chance has been calculated to be 1 chance in 10 to the 119th thousandths. In order to understand and really appreciate these figures of that 119,000, right? it only takes 1 to the 10 to the 50th for anything to be considered impossible to happen. Okay? Now, let's turn to another individual. His name is Dr. Michael Behe. Now, he came up with this idea about the intelligent design theory, which we've heard on the news numerous times. So I'll tell you what, let's turn to slide 30.
Dr. Michael Behe, a biochemist, proposed the theory of intelligent design. The design and parts of a living cell are such that it requires all of its parts to be present in order for it to function. If any part is missing, then the cell will not function. The cell is considered to be irreducibly complex. Thus, a living cell cannot evolve by random chance. The law of probability also shows that the odds of life occurring by chance are effectively zero.
Does this make any sense? So, what I'd like to do next, which is extremely important, and as by the way, we're just winding it down and we'll be done very shortly. This has brought up so many concerns to me that I decided to put Darwinism to the scientific testing method. Slide 31, please. First, does his theory pass the observable test? No. No one has ever observed Darwinian evolution, and that's the changing of one species into another. Second, is it testable? No. You can't test something that you can't observe. Thirdly, is it repeatable? Not if you can't test it. Okay, let's turn to question number 16. Can Darwinism pass the scientific testing method? I've shown that other scientists, including myself, say no. What is Darwinism? First, is it fact? Fact is defined as that which exists, something witnessed firsthand, a datum of experience. It doesn't meet this criteria because no one has ever witnessed Darwinian evolution. 2. Hypothesis, a tentative scientific explanation for a set of observed facts subject to further proof or disproof through further observation and experimentation. The usual progression is that a hypothesis graduates to being a theory. I believe that since it wasn't observed and the scientific community continues to investigate it, we can call it a hypothesis. 3. Theory, a framework of scientific explanations concerning a certain phenomena or group of phenomena which has gained validity by showing predictive power or explaining newly observed facts. I believe it's a stretch for it to be called a theory because it lacks predictive power. 4. Scientific law, a regular pattern of occurrence of natural events, so regular and predictable that there are few or no exceptions. The fewer the exceptions to the law, the better established it is. For example, the law of gravity and the second law of thermodynamics are very well established scientific laws. No exceptions to them have ever been shown. I don't believe anyone would consider Darwin's theory a fact or a law. In my opinion, Darwinism is a good philosophy and hypothesis. Let's look at question 17. What is Darwinism? Fact, hypothesis, theory, law, or nothing but a mere interesting philosophy? According to definition, Darwinism appears to be, at best, a hypothesis or an interesting philosophy.
Nobel Prize winner Ernst Chain states evolution, a hypothesis based on no evidence and irreconcilable with the facts.
Now I need to address the last two statements on the scorecard. You know why? Because Darwinists will try to make this a religion issue, and it's not. I will use the book of Genesis to show that this book addresses the origin of life, biogenesis, and the groups of animals that evolutionist Alfred Fisher stated that are not addressed in Darwin's book. So the book that Darwinists ridicule answers the questions they can't. Therefore, they must turn this into a religious issue because there is no other way to stop the facts of Genesis. Chapter 1, verse 1, 21, 25, and 27. Can they comply with any of the laws of science?
Verse 21, And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. Verse 25, And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. Verse 27, So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them.
Can they comply with any of the laws of science? Genesis supports microevolution that states all animals can only reproduce after their own kind, not like Darwinian macroevolution, which believes that one species evolves into another, like a dinosaur evolving into a bird. What do you think about Sir Arthur Keith's statement on Darwinism, which is slide 34?
Sir Arthur Keith, who wrote the foreword to the 100th anniversary edition of Darwin's book, The Origin of Species in 1959, stated, and I quote, "Evolution is unproved and unprovable. We believe it only because the only alternative is special creation, and that is unthinkable."
Do you believe what he has to say? Let's go to slide 20, please.
So far, no post-Darwinian theory has been able to deal with the major inadequacy of neo-Darwinism, the source of new biological information. As stated by Harvard biochemist, evolutionary theory is a tumultuous field where many differing views are now competing for dominance. Essenston, 2003.
What do you think about his statement? As you can see, there's a lot of problems with Darwinism. What I would like to recommend is that our education system be honest. Come on, guys. Be honest about the problems facing Darwinism and address them, and allow other theories of evolution to be taught. You know, when I spoke with the State Board of Education, about the Santorum Amendment, they said it's not law, and therefore they are not required to abide by it. So unless it becomes law, our children will never, ever know the problems with Darwinism or know of any other theories of evolution. Therefore, the Santorum Amendment must become law. Now, to complete the picture of Darwinism, you really need to understand the impact his theory has had on society. You will be absolutely shocked, trust me on this, by the many horrors that have been justified by his theory. Now, you can see them on another DVD, which I made, called Darwin's Impact on Society. Now, I really hope you enjoyed our biological journey through time. And with your newly acquired information, you will be able to understand who we are and where did we come from. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you will challenge others to take the Santorum Challenge. Thank you again. This is Nelston signing off. Okay? Dun, 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 dun.
You can order this DVD by writing to Honesty in Education, the Santorum Challenge, Post Office Box 540124, NSL, Utah 84054. The cost is $20 plus shipping and handling. For the video Darwin's Impact on Society, you can order this DVD by writing to Honesty in Education, Darwin's Impact on Society, Post Office Box 540124, NSL, Utah 84054. The cost is $20 plus shipping and handling.